And welcome everybody. My name is John Buck. I'm joined today with Pleasure of Doubt and Nick, and we're part of the Bevry community here for open collaboration and discussion regarding philosophical topics and practical elements to people, bringing utility and purpose or meaning to people's lives. I don't know. We do a lot of stuff, I guess. But anyway, we've got links down below to our Discord channel if you guys ever want to join in. And today we're going to be discussing John Vervaake's 46th lecture and sort of probably on a more broad scope, John Vervaake's series as a whole. I know we didn't quite prep that much, but at least since, I don't know, like I'd say the first half of this lecture was sort of sparse. So I think it kind of gives us a bit more room to kind of just go over our overall thoughts to the series as we've had it so far. But
I thought he called it conclusion. I thought he was going to bring a little bit more, but he sort of, his conclusion looked pretty much like what he's been talking about for the last 3, 4, or really since he talked about the religion of religion. I don't know that he added much in there, and that's something I think we can talk about. I'm still thinking, like I'm not sure if it's a criticism yet, or if it's just we haven't filled in the details. Like I can see it, but sorry,
that's probably like a worthwhile place to start. I don't know if it's we can call it a criticism just yet, because I think that's sort of what he's wanting to be doing, is what he's done in the past, I don't know, 15 lectures is to try to build up his conception of wisdom and meaning making and relevancy realization, all of that. And then now what he's going to be doing for these next 4 lectures is applying that to the prophets of the meaning crisis, as I think he calls them. And these prophets are people kind of recognizing that there's some sort of disconnect that's going on between the people and them having some sort of agent arena relationship, either through the mechanistic understanding of that science gives us, or through like the disharmony between your community or different things like that. And so what he's trying to do, it seems like, is using all his past work from the previous lectures and then kind of bringing it in dialogue with these different figures. Do you want to go over like some of the figures that he mentions as the prophets of the meaning crisis?
Well, sure. Although before, do you want me to go over first? So let me just go over first what he talks about before he comes up to that. So I mean, he starts the lecture off by just summarizing his model theory of wisdom, which like that he and Leo Ferreira put together. And it was sort of a useful summary. So maybe it's worth just going over quickly, just all the aspects that he sees part of wisdom. So he sees, so all of this, I think, is what wisdom is. So it enhances an inferential processing through active open-mindedness. And we can come back through these. Like these are basically the different psychotechnologies. So active open-mindedness, enhancing insightful processing through mindfulness. So there's the inferential aspect and the insightful aspect. And they're both, and I think what he had said before is a lot of the prior discussions of wisdom had just focused on the inferential aspect, but he thinks we need to bring in the insightful aspects of so processing through mindfulness. So it, whereas active open-mindedness can lead you to a sort of logical inferential process for figuring things out, sort of a propositional aspect. The insight is less propositional, so it's sort of more, I guess, perspectival and participatory. It just sort of comes to you. Oh, I think you're muted.
There we go. That's what he was connecting to. What was it? System 1 thinking, where you're sort of like making some sort of leap to a conclusion, where even on, I guess you could say, insufficient evidence, but it's still warranted in certain ways because you're getting small bits to the pieces and then trying to put them together into something as a conclusion there.
Yeah, and what I would add back in is, so I think it's a back and forth, and he may have said this, but in case he didn't, I think, so you have the inferential stuff, and that's great. The insightful stuff is key, but then you have to bring the inferential stuff back to the insightful stuff. So you can't just leave. I don't think you can just leave the insight as insight, because like we've all talked about, insights can be wrong. Insights come to us in a leap sort of way, but that doesn't mean we should stick with that leap. I think we then have to bring back in the S1, no, bring back in the S2, the S2 thinking to then critique our own, to double check, because you can have an aha, that's amazing, it's brilliant, and dead wrong, right?
Yeah.
So I think it has to be this back and forth process between the two, or else I think you're kind of in trouble.
Right. And I like what he says, where it's not that these are like working at two different stages. It's like either one system of thinking is in the foreground and the other's in the background, or vice versa. They're like working together, they're both working, and it's just which one is being emphasized when how you're working on this sort of problem. And
because if I understand it, it's hard to do both at the same time. You can't really do S1 and S2 simultaneously. So you have to sort of give them each their time and then have them ping pong back and forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it like makes sense, especially like for S1 thinking, where it's like very much like triggered based upon survival or something like that. Then it would be like highly advantageous to use S1 thinking when you're like being presented with some sort of predator, and you got to like do some quick thinking on your on the tips of your toes or whatever. And I think we sort of get that same sort of style when we're in some sort of like what we perceive to be some sort of dangerous confrontation between other parties. It's just that instead of fighting for our lives, we're like fighting for our beliefs or something like that.
That's funny, because I'm a very non-regular meditator, but I want to be a regular meditator. But I know very often when I meditate, solutions to problems just pop into my mind. So I get what he's talking about, that mindfulness, the cultivation of mindfulness can definitely, at least in my experience, cultivate insight. And I'm not talking about insight to the problems of the universe. I'm talking about insight to the things that I've been working on, like problems that I've been having at the time. And I'll be like, oh, I should do that. Like, that's a great idea. And I hadn't thought about it before, but it just came to me during the meditation, even when I wasn't trying to concentrate on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how he's connecting meditation in with it, because I was taking it that insight was a system one process, but from the way that he was describing meditation, it seems very much like you're taking a step back away from yourself in order to sort of get a more rational understanding or objective.
What it does is the psychotechnology of meditation seems to enhance your propensity for having S1 leaps. So and in the sense of problem solving, like again, I don't have when I'm having those insights during meditation, it's not like there's a tiger coming at me. It's just figuring out the solution to a problem that's been troubling me. Maybe it's even just something to do, whether it's related to career or family or whatever. The process of focusing your mind in that way seems to do something to bring about these. I think because it quiets your mind, and it maybe lets your mind then work out some of the problems that it's been focusing on in the background. I don't know. That's how I sort of think about it.
Yeah, that might be it. Just like I know there's certain theories of mind where like you have these sort of subconscious processes that are going on, and so if you have these sort of subconscious processes happening, and then but our I don't know our little self that sits right up at front most of the time, if he kind of like takes a back seat for a while, all these subconscious processes can kind of like make their way to us now. We're like getting out of the way of our own psyche. I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird how it happens.
Yeah, Nick?
Go ahead.
I was just going to add in, I think it's also important to recognize that, right, the bandwidth between those two channels is, vastly different. we can process enormous amounts of information with these kind of background processes that the conscious mind just literally does not have the bandwidth to process. So yeah, there's something there, I think, in our ability, right? What looks like spontaneous problem solving is likely just being able to account for vastly more variables than the conscious mind is able to.
All right, so that
doesn't
makes
mean
it
it's right, but
right. that makes it a little bit easier than for me to sort of map, I guess, his S1 and S2 thinking onto McGilchrist's left and right hemisphere kind of mapping of thinking, where our leaping to insights is, say, more of the right brain or right hemisphere, and very much more subconscious, whereas the making more logical or inductive sort of inferences is very much the more left hemisphere, and very much that way of going about things. So I don't know if there's an exact mapping, but it's at least low resolution enough that it gives me something to grasp onto, I guess.
It seemed like he kind of went after McGilchrist in one of his Q&As recently.
I haven't been listening to his Q&As, so I'm probably missing quite a bit of his extra stuff there. I know that
he said he was supposed to have a discussion with him coming up too, so that'll probably be interesting when it.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, so I know that there's certain things he sort of seems to like leave off during these lectures that maybe he goes into more so in his Q&As. Like there's a bit of ontology dodging or metaphysics that he's dodging within these sorts of lectures, just because I don't think they're really necessary to his series itself. But maybe I know he's had a couple discussions with other people, but I don't know if he goes into it even more so during his Q&As on those types of topics. But that'll be something.
He does a little, but it does seem to be a consistent feature that he dodges metaphysics as much as possible.
All right, go ahead, Brett. Sorry.
So the next one he talks about for cultivating wisdom is enhancing the capacity for internalization by internalizing the sage and cultivating Sarferson. And so I've been thinking a lot about this internalizing the sage recently, and you know, it's interesting because, you know, when you go through that little dialogue in your head, you often do, I think, come up with an answer, and sometimes you don't like the answer. It reminds me of Jordan Peterson, you know, where he talks about seek and ye shall find, but sometimes you don't want to know, you know, the answer, because then you have to go out and do it, and that you know, that can produce you know, a fair amount of anxiety. And I was thinking from the religious perspective that internalizing the sage is probably a lot of what's going on with prayer. You know, the seek and ye shall find, the asking God. You know, whether you frame it in a religious, you know, in a God format, or you just frame it in what should I do, I think when we do ask ourselves these questions, we definitely do seem to come up with answers that we know, and it puts a focus on those answers that I think it's just at the back of your mind and sort of picking at you. But sometimes until you ask yourself the question in your head, you know, at least for me, I find it. I mean, I know there's people who think in images and people who think in thoughts. I think in thoughts. I don't even see images in my head. I know Tyler, too bad Tyler's not here tonight. He thinks almost exclusively, I think, in images, and I wonder if his internalizing the sage is a very different experience. Like mine is an internal dialogue. What do you guys have when you do that? Do you have a dialogue, or do you see images, or?
I think I probably think more in thoughts, like even just thinking of like numbers or words. I typically think of the textual word itself rather than the image that it represents. Like sometimes if I think of apple, like I can conceive of an apple visually, but I think typically I don't even bother with that at all. I just think of like the concept itself, apple, and sometimes even I don't know if it's directly in a textual sense in my head, but at least something as minimal as that. I think that's how I typically go about my thinking.
I describe mine as being tactile.
Mm.
I actually had a very interesting conversation in the Discord with Tyler, where we were kind of playing around with those various ideas and ways of thinking. But yeah, it very much feels like using whatever it is, that part of the brain that processes tactile sensations.
So you'll
and then
actually feel what's going on, like in your hands, or
Or that's how you think of it, is like its connection to you, sort of.
It's quite literally like I'm feeling thoughts. I often get it's kind of pseudo images, right? An image in the way that your mind might compile an image if you have your eyes closed and you're running your hand along something.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like that. And I can get kind of general features of a thought, and then the trick becomes kind of pasting words onto this shape in a way where it feels like it fits properly within the grooves of it. Yeah.
What is it? And you're like an artisan, right? Like you craft things. So that's interesting. Oh, here's Tyler.
Sorry, Tyler. I didn't see. That's the thing. Like, only sometimes will Zoom give me the little doorbell saying that somebody's trying to get in. And sorry, man. thanks for messaging me, though.
Speak of the devil.
Yeah. Did you hear, like, what is it? You feel where your ears burning or something? Is that? Were you listening, Tyler, to what?
My grave. I was. Yeah. I just literally just turned in and I heard my name and I thought, oh.
That's my cue. And there's Craig as well.
Oh, great. Hey, Craig.
Yes.
Anyway,
I had a fantastic discussion with Nick where images turned into tactile thought. It was quite new and interesting. I've never experienced it because pleasure of doubt's quite right. I'm predominantly visual in my expression of cognitive structures. I think I find it easier to encode information in visual structures.
So when you internalize the sage, how does that or if you've tried it, how does that manifest for you?
Depends on what kind of wisdom I'm trying to give language to or give form to. So to your point about it being a dialogue, a conversation, if I were to do that in my mind, it's in the content or the container of a visual image as well. The people would be speaking in my mind. They would be standing in a place, right, situated somehow. But there is another element you said of prayer, which is internalizing of the sage, and there are elements to that positioning of the body itself in the mode of prayer, which I think are vital. They're important, not necessarily and this is to touch on the tactile element, right? Because to kneel, right, to put yourself in some kind of prostrated state or some submission, some weakening state, is to place your mind in a certain teachable mode, right?
Yeah, there's kind of the very stance that you take. Like if you're sitting in a classroom, you're taking a very much of a passive stance, whereas if you're standing, you're taking a much more active stance. Like even in during the Divine Liturgy in Eastern Orthodox churches, and probably many others as well, there a lot of it you have to stand during it, and it's very much sort of a not call and response, but you have to like be attentive with the liturgy as it's going through, because there's things that you have to respond to. You have to make the sign of the cross and many other things as well. And it's very interesting to see the distinction between when we're in a sort of more passive state of, say, sitting, or a more active state, like sitting up front or standing, or just the very way that we sort of like go about how our stances really changes the way in which we sort of conceptualize our relationship with our environment.
I think meditation is more, they say, a dignified, like it's sitting usually, but like a dignified posture. You're supposed to take, where like you're not supposed to lean back on your chair. You're sort of holding yourself up.
You don't want to accidentally fall asleep during meditation, right?
Exactly. It's easy to do.
Yeah. Hey, Craig.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah. We were just
how long have you been going on for? Just 20 minutes or so?
Just about like 10, 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, cool. Who's winning?
Brett's winning so far. I think he's talking about.
Usually he's winning. I can't stay very long. I got to go eat in about half an hour, 40 minutes.
Sure.
I pop in. I'm down in the car in front of my driveway. When my wife is home, I went to the forest today. I'm in the car, sitting in the car parked in front of the apartment.
Oh, great. Yeah, we've been talking about just going over Vervaeke and Leo Ferreira's cultivation of wisdom. We were just talking about the internalizing the sage, and I was bringing up sort of, I think there's probably something similar to prayer, or when you're praying and asking God, seek and ye shall find. I think it's probably a very similar process to internalizing the sage. What do you think?
Well, there's a whole bunch of different Christian types of prayer. If you're talking specifically Christianity, internalizing the sage is more like contemplative tradition, where you have like monastic Christianity, where it's more, in today's Christianity, prayer is often like petitioning God, which is totally different than internalizing the sage, totally different type of thing. Then there's different types, though. It depends on which types of Christian groups you're talking to, how they use prayer.
And then there's also the more like structured prayers of, say, like the Lord's Prayer or the Jesus Prayer, things like that, where it's not even any sort of dialogical process going on. It's just like a recurring sort of like a mantra or something to kind of get you into a state of mind.
That's totally like the thing that we were talking about doing, Pleasure of Doubt, about doing the experiment with the atheist. I was doing that 3 years ago with a guy, and he had originally deconverted from Christianity, and then he was telling me about when he went through this phase where he was trying to seek God. He did these weird type of prayers that were like, he'd go into a room and he'd say these things, like preordained things that it was like this weird ritual that usually doesn't happen in Christianity, but there are some Christians who have types of prayers like that, where they speak out. Like, I don't even know what he was doing, but it was weird. It was different from how most Christians pray.
I don't know if it's that weird, because like both within Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Eastern Orthodoxy, you'll have your prayer beads, and then you'll go through like for each bead on the necklace or whatever it is, you'll recite the Lord's Prayer or something like that, and then you'll move on to the next one, or you'll do a Hail Mary or something like that.
No, it's not weird. It's weird for like Catholicism does that too. They'll say 50 Hail Marys and 40 Our Fathers, and Catholics do that as well. It's not weird. It's just weird in context of most of the Christians that you interact with who call themselves Christian on Twitter. Some of them are Orthodox, actually, but most of them are just like, normal, regular Protestant type non-denominationals and stuff. And they don't usually do stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's a different type of prayer.
Yeah.
He said with his meat lips, making meat sounds.
Yeah, weird is always like within a specific context, but yeah, it still makes sense. I mean, for most things that we're talking about, it would be very weird.
There's a couple takes on internalizing the sage, I think, as well. And I think it's in Eastern Orthodox. There's a process that I cannot remember the name of, but it is very much a internalizing the sage type of process, although it is framed in an existential sense, or perhaps even phenomenological, where in some sense the goal is to experience the world like Christ experienced it, which is very different than internalizing the sage as a dialectical kind of conversation within yourself. So it is kind of like
sort of how I've thought about it. Like like the internal question, what should I do? And then the answer pops in, I should do this. I know what I should do. Whether I do it or not is a different question. But that sort of dialogue back and forth, and just going through the act of saying, what should I do, often produces the answer in a much more clear way than if you don't ask yourself that question. But and do you think is that a different process than what you do, say, Craig, when you're seeking you shall find, when you're asking God the way? Is that a different process?
Yeah, there's a lot of different stuff. One of the things I talked about in one of my videos, you remember the miracle of the car keys? It's something atheists talk about all the time.
Yeah.
Where when you pray to God and you find your car keys, there's a really obvious explanation for that, because you go, if you actually are going into a meditative type state, it's a bit of an altered state of consciousness if you're doing it correctly. And you go into a prayer and you kind of contact in your subconscious mind, and your subconscious mind remembers where you put the car keys. You put them in the drawer and you just forgot you put them in the drawer, or you put them down in the bathroom and you forgot you left them there. But you remember, you deep down inside of you remember. And when you're praying, you're accessing different parts of your brain. And that's why the miracle of the car keys actually does exist. It's not like God is going, yeah, here are your car keys. You're slowing down your breathing, and you're altering your consciousness. And a lot of prayer in my type of prayer is worship and doing that, like transforming your consciousness type prayer, which I think is, I'm not really sure how they defined internalizing the sage, but I think that would fall under the category, because you're kind of expanding your wisdom parameters and accessing different parts of your mind. Other than that, the other types of prayer that Christians like I do wouldn't fall into the category. It'd be more like petitioning, petition type prayers. And most people do that, but you try to teach people that that's not actually the right way to pray. Even Christians in the churches who do that, they always say, seek God, not the result. And that's kind of like do more of a fellowshipping type prayer with the Spirit than trying to actually, get God to give you money or something like that. I don't know if that completely made sense how I just explained it. Did it? Maybe.
Yeah, and I it sounds like at least for the asking, like the finding the car keys, it's probably a very similar type of process what we're talking about here. And I think that's interesting. I think we can draw on these same, call them psychotechnologies. I think prayer is a psychotechnology as well, from different perspectives, and have similar results. Like seek and ye shall find, makes a lot of sense. Ask and ye shall receive. I mean,
yes.
If you don't ask yourself, your chances of finding that answer are a lot lower.
Yes, ask yourself, absolutely zero. Exactly.
Right. So I think he's on to something. He's on to something here. Should I go on to the next one?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. The next one is the salient. So that we're going over his cultivation of wisdom theory. So the salient landscape organizes away from self-deception and towards the truth, towards the truth, what is good and what is beautiful. And this seems pretty. I mean, it's an easy one to say. I mean, the how is the is the kicker. So I mean, but I guess obviously we should be. I think it's the saying we should be focused on looking for truth, looking for what's good and what's beautiful, I guess, as opposed to not. But that sure. I don't know if there's a lot to.
So his description, I guess, of what he sees himself doing through this whole series is giving a secular naturalistic account for meaning making. And it's I don't know, having gone through all of it, I'm maybe he did do that, and I just didn't realize it. But I guess I'm not seeing what makes his description explicitly secular or naturalistic, really.
I guess the only thing is that none of it depends on being grounded in a deity.
Well, and he also matches it up with neuroscience and philosophy a lot.
Somewhat, yeah.
It's pretty. I mean, you can take all of his stuff, and if you just tweaked a couple of words here and there, you could disguise it as spiritual. You know what I mean?
Well, no, but he not even tweaking. He defines spirit, like he's talking about spirituality, and he thinks there's nothing incompatible between spiritualism and secularism.
That's why I find him so valuable, because he kind of finds that place where you could be talking interchangeably about, quote unquote, woo spiritual type things, or neurological processes, brain chemistries, or philosophy. And he kind of floats in and out of all three categories really easily.
In another way of saying it, he's taking the woo out of spirituality.
Yes, totally. I just meant as a descriptive word, not totally. That's exactly why that's exactly why I would cite him a lot and tell atheists that they should listen to his videos, because it will make you almost automatically. The thing that atheists are always looking for is rational, scientific, rational, this, that, and the other thing. And he puts enough of that in that you can ground it in the real world, the objectively verifiable, scientifically knowable facts of the real world. But he's also talking about the woo aspects, or the spiritual way, if woo is the wrong word. You know what I mean? He's talking about that he's interchanging both in a way that's pretty organic to both processes, so that nobody would necessarily, you could put a religious person into his class and tell them it's a spiritual person, and add a couple of words here and there, and they probably receive all of it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I think that is one of the great utilities that Vervaeke brings, is that he's sort of providing this resource that is not just to the spiritual and not just for the secular, but it's something that could be shared, hypothetically at least, between both of them, and being able to sort of communicate about these types of things. And I think, like, successfully, at least so far, and that's something he should really, we should laud him for. The question I guess I'm having is simply, does it constitute a secular account of meaning making simply because he doesn't bother to go into, I guess, the metaphysics behind it? Is his understanding of
well, he does go into the metaphysics. I mean, his are naturalism. I mean, that's the metaphysics. He's pretty clear on that.
Yeah, but I mean, there's certain metaphysics that he said that he is sort of necessary to science. Like at some point he brought up Aristotle. Like he says that potential is sort of necessary for science in one lecture. I can't recall exactly which. And I know that you and I, Brett, like our first interaction was very much was first going over Aristotle's argument for motion, like very much using the fact that we experience change, we experience an actualization of a potential as the grounding for the unmoved mover within Aristotelian metaphysics. And so the point of his series is not to like refute all of the account, all of the arguments for God. I recognize that for sure. But is it the case that he's building this sort of science or this naturalistic account of meaning making, and he's saying that it doesn't require a God, but he hasn't really proven that, just because he's not talking about the things that he's using these types of things which might need the God or might not need a God.
And ultimately, it is going to require God. We're going to smuggle Jesus in to Christian.
I think what we could say is it's compatible with a God, but also compatible with there being no God.
Okay, so that makes more sense.
At the very least, we don't have a complete description in a secular framework, right? And
Yeah.
one must either assume it will be the case, or one must have faith that the secular framework will prove sufficient to fully explain reality.
Well, and the fact that that's not the point of the series, and so it would be sort of silly for him to go into all that. But what you were saying there, Brett, makes a lot more sense. It's not that he's making this account of meaning making that is exclusive to naturalists. He's doing it in a way that's compatible for naturalists, as well as probably being compatible for supernaturalists as well.
Right. What he's doing is one of the reasons I latched onto him is what he's doing is what I talk about on my channel a lot. Is that once you get past the first meeting of science and spirituality and religion, the first meeting was really disruptive to the faith community and the religious people, because there are things that the science is going to say are facts that are not necessarily negotiable. And so the religious people are going to circle the wagons. But the second meeting is where he's at, where they start really analyzing the religious experience and coming to the conclusions that are organic to the process of analyzing the religion. So there's some things that he's in almost perfect agreement with the spirit, with religious seekers, about like the value of meditation, things like that, because they're organic. They're found by naturalism, but they're organic conclusions.
Yeah,
that's something. Don't think he's not ruling out religion, and he's not making it a defensive religion. He's just doing what science ultimately does, which is dismantles and tinkers with and analyzes to get at the truth.
This is something I really appreciate him going through his series, is that he's willing to be critical of those that are on his side, like metaphysically speaking, like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins or people like that, while also being charitable to people that are explicitly do not share his same metaphysical worldviews. Like that, it shows to me a component to his character that is quite admirable. His ability to do that.
That's why I describe him this as the bridge. It's a potential bridge between theists and non-theists to have this common language and common experiences that we can at least share and talk about and even experience together, while even if we have different versions of how we get there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Totally.
I don't know. I often get the feeling that the naturalism, he only ever states a kind of overt naturalism. I think he did it at somewhere near the beginning of the series.
He does in the middle too. Yeah.
In the middle. I don't know. I get the sensation that he's smuggling a whole lot of stuff and is using naturalism almost like a shield rather than it in any way legitimately being the basis.
Sorry, a shield against what?
A shield to match properly and within the circumstance that he's teaching in, right? Teaching a university class, and then also as a shield to, in some ways, to make his message more scalable so that it isn't automatically typecasted as another New Age project.
Well,
wait, do you mean that he might actually not be a naturalist?
I think that it would be very difficult to properly justify a lot of his claims within a naturalistic framework.
But here's the thing:
overtly impossible.
If that was the case, I would expect him to sound a lot more like Jordan Peterson, who I think does that. Like he's in the few points where he talks about this directly, and I could look through my notes, but he is very explicit. Like he says at one point, "I do not believe in a God. I think that's all wrong." Like he's very blunt. He doesn't use any of the language that Jordan Peterson uses to toe that line. Like he's like, I want to be very clear. I'm respectful towards religion, but I don't believe it. Like I don't.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I don't think it's consistent. I think that type of statement is one of almost virtue signaling than it is.
But see, I don't think he is. I think he's saying, no, I think you can get this in a completely naturalistic. I get that you doubt that it's possible. I think what you're saying is coming from the perspective of none of this is possible without there being that spiritual, without there being God. So he must be doing something like that because I don't think it's possible without God. But I think his position is it certainly is possible without God.
Sure. I think he probably considers himself a naturalist, and that his like his understanding of these types of things certainly doesn't have to appeal to any sort of supernatural elements.
What's he smuggling in? Buddhism?
I mean, a lot.
Like at the very least.
Well, he's not
There's
smuggling
enormous
Christianity.
amounts of it's, I don't know.
So he's a woo artist, and we're all just duped. It's all woo artistry, and we're just falling for it. It's really scientific, and then we're like, yeah, it sounds so scientific.
No, I don't think that's what Nick is saying at all. It's just that he's using all of these, let's say, Lego pieces that he didn't get from within his naturalistic set. He got them from the supernaturalistic set, but he's pretending, or it's not that he's pretending. He thinks that they work within his naturalistic set, and so
right,
that's why
that's exactly why he's so useful, because unless there are errors. If Nick is saying that he's borrowing, I think Nick would agree with what you just said, that he's borrowing some of this from supernatural type, like spiritual type traditions. But as long as there are no errors, and maybe there are, we can talk about that. But as long as there are no errors, what he's actually doing is really constructing the bridge between, not just talking about the bridge, but actually finding it where the scientific rationalist can actually meet with the spiritual person, and we're all on the same page because there's truth there. That's how I see it. I mean, I maybe he is smuggling in stuff, but the question is the stuff he's smuggling in actually true or valid or work, or, you know what I'm saying?
Off the top of my head,
all of that's fine. It just, again, it eventually starts to feel dishonest.
I'm trying to take
the only one that I can think of that he
terms and mash them together with agape.
Well, agape is the one thing I was just going to say, is the one area that I don't really think, unless I missed it, that he really provided the scientific backing for. But for every other part of these lectures, other than agape, I think he's gone into a tremendous amount of detail in the scientific backing for what he's talking about.
Other than the orientation which brings someone into being.
For myself, I'm also still very much confused as to how he maps his Buddhism in with his Platonism. Like, those are two, from my perspective, incompatible metaphysics. But I don't know, and he just hasn't gone into it. So, and that probably wouldn't be something he would go into in this series, but maybe he goes into it in Q&As or something like that.
And the Buddha always said that, from what I understand, that, if science or research or whatever, he didn't frame it in that words, but if empiricism produces a different result, go with that. So Buddhism and science, I think, are very compatible in that way.
Buddha also said, do not believe in anything simply because someone has spoken it to you.
Yeah. But I listen, I mean, he seems to have gone out of his way to try not to smuggle things in. Like, he can't, it's hard to do a perfect job, but he seems to have been very careful to say, I'm not trying to smuggle things in. I'm trying to tell you exactly where I get all these ideas. I'm trying to tell you what came from religion, what came from science, where they intermingle. So I don't know if it's quite fair to, like I think it is fair to say Jordan Peterson sometimes does that kind of stuff, but and he does it sort of unabashedly. Like he's very clear in his unwillingness to make firm statements on whether he believes in a God in the same way that theists believe in a God, and which I think, you can draw your own conclusions.
Do you mind if I ask a couple of questions?
Mm-hmm.
By what authority do you trust what he says?
By what authority do I trust what he says?
Vervaeke or
Vervaeke, yeah.
Okay.
By no authority. He's building a case. Now, have I gone back and read all the subsources? No. And am I completely sold? I mean,
do you feel he has any authority to speak what he's speaking?
I mean, he is a U.F.T. professor, so he at least has some amount of authority to be able to get into there.
Like, when he says, Heidegger said this, I would probably be willing, all things being equal, to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Like it's probably pretty close to what Heidegger said, even if it's not, even if there may be other interpretations, I would say, yeah, I mean, probably Heidegger said something like that.
Yeah, I would give him that authority too. I take a lot of what he says as at least an intelligent interpretation of the original source material. So I do give him authority in that sense.
Right. So he's assembling a picture of He's assembling a picture of cognitive science. He's using all this language. He's telling you about how the brain works. He's talking about philosophy, history, philosophy, all this stuff, right? He's gathering a really big picture. You're following, right? You're tracking. You're going along with him, right?
Yeah.
Some of it. I don't track with all of it.
Yeah. Same.
To the extent that we can, yeah.
Okay.
And that's kind of the thing, like, I'm curious of, I guess, is like, in this model that he's kind of presenting, does it have any, and not to say that everything has to have some sort of predictive quality to it, but does it have something that, like, does it give us anything that we can kind of work with and then be able to, like, test to see, oh yeah, this does seem to be
that's funny, because that's where I was going to end up, because I want to know really how much. I mean, you have to trust him, right? You're giving him benefit of the doubt. Why do you trust him? Because if I stopped a random Joe Schmo on the sidewalk and he started talking to me like Vervaeke, I'd be like, yeah, okay, buddy. Agape this, agape that. All right. I mean, what's going on here?
Yeah, sorry.
Is the format too, like the fact that he's being displayed on YouTube? How much of this stuff, I wonder, interacts with the manner in which we receive this information, and how much of that are we relying upon for building up this narrative that he's giving us?
Well, here, I'll tell you, there's a few ways to approach it. One is, okay, first of all, he's a university professor. A lot of this is taken from his university classes. Well, like I said, I haven't gone through all those sources. There are people who have, and I think to some extent, I think I'm going to think that if there's something he's just really getting wrong, there's somebody who's going to say, hey, I've read this stuff and it does not say what he's saying. So I'm going to trust that the collective,
him, right? Because he's a university professor,
right? That the collective, that some intellectual is going to call him on it if it's just total bullshit. But what I'll say is the parts that I do have personal experience on that touch on what he said. Like I was just talking earlier, I think before you came on, Tyler, that I will often, even though I'm not an everyday meditator, I'm trying to become one, but when I meditate, I often find I have insights, especially in terms of problem solving, where solutions to problems I've been having in my life just pop into my head. So a lot of what I have looked into a lot of meditation stuff. So I know a lot of the science that he's talked about in meditation tracks with what I've looked into in the past. So there, in the areas where I do have personal experience and have studied myself, it all tracks. And I think different people have said similar things about the areas that they've tracked. Some
of it is fairly obvious. Like some of the things that he draws upon are fairly obvious connections, like the flow state. Okay, I've heard of that from other sources and it matches everything I've known. If it were wildly inaccurate or even vaguely inaccurate, I would pick up on. There's a lot of things I don't accept from him, but like the flow state with the altered states of consciousness, with shamanism and its connection to Buddhism, which connects to cognitive science and studying the brain. All of this stuff has other sources that I've heard very similar information. He's just drawing different connections that I always felt were there. So there's nothing really all that radically groundbreaking. Just like with Jordan Peterson, it's the right ideas at the right time, and none of it is all that radically surprising. Like that, it all makes sense to me. There may be some flaccid, some of the stuff. I'm different than all of you because I'm using them for a reason. Like I latch onto the things that I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I can use that, and then I'll take it and I'll start talking about it on my channel. Because some of this stuff is really useful to me.
How is it useful?
Well, I'm doing apologetics and I'm trying to match science up with faith. And I see a lot of parallels with, like, I did a whole thing on my turning up subjective experiences with like patriotism, the 4th of July. basically borrowed from him. And I did a whole thing on it of how you strengthen your Christian experience in a way that's totally subjective, but then totally real. I kind of borrowed it from him. I mean, not necessarily, it had a lot to do with ideas of my own, but once I heard his thing on it, I was like, oh yeah, cool, I'll run with that. So a lot of the stuff that he's bringing up, some of it may be flaccid and some of it may be smuggled in Buddhism. And yeah, maybe his agape thing is flaccid. I don't really listen to him all that carefully, to tell you the truth. I listen to it to get what I want out of it. And like the agape thing, I might, if he starts getting like boring or off point or not that convincing about certain things, I'll tune it out. I'm listening while I'm jogging, you know. So like I don't even notice the stuff that
some of us are creating a 200-page notes file. So.
Right. Well, okay. So maybe
Brett's making his Vervaekean manifesto.
His objection makes a lot more sense on how seriously you're taking it. I'm just interested and curious, and I'm using some of it. I'm not like, and I'm digging into some of his source material because it's all along the lines of stuff that I'm really interested in, what my channel's about. So,
and I know that like the rest of us here, we've been kind of like very much interested in Vervaeke's project, but still sort of taking it from somewhat of an arm's length distance, like still being able to accept a lot of the stuff from it and to take it.
Right, we're skeptical of it sufficiently.
Yeah. I think it's clear that there's a tremendous amount of extremely valuable terms he's come up with, framings for things that he's come up with. I think we all agree there that that's not what I was commenting on.
And Tyler, I would say that there's nothing that he said in terms of like the religion that's not a religion that I think should be taken as an authority. I think my personal position is he's given enough reason that it seems like something worth trying. So the experiment is key. You know, this is something that I would want to see put in practice and see if it works and to be adjusted from there. Like I don't think, and I think that's how he's presenting it too. I think that's why he's so careful not to give too many of this is how I think it should look like.
Well, there's also parts of him that are murky and unclear and haven't really been fully processed as much.
Because it's a work in process. Right.
Right.
He's doing it as this is part of his research, I think.
But what purchase does it have on your soul?
Well, Brett's a total head. I'm just checking him out. Brett's like a disciple.
Really? No. I mean, to me, the best way I learn is through doing these notes, and if they're useful to other people too, I share them. But
that's always the question, though. Okay, that's always the question.
Well, I think he's right that I'm more of his target audience than the Christians here. Although I think you guys are still part of. I think you guys are the type of Christians who are in his target audience. So, from what I know, but how
much is it moving you?
Well, I can recognize, at least for my own cases, or for my own observations, I guess, of Brett, is being able to kind of see his being able to see these new elements to religion that are there. For one, because he didn't know about these components to religion, but also seeing the sort of connection to them with psychology and like actually providing some sort of useful faculty to the people within the religion. That's something I think that you've been noticing through this series, Brett.
So Vervaeke's work has been instrumental in moving you closer to the religion needle. Got it.
Well, no, remember one of my biggest aims is bringing people closer together, and I think he's given a lot of that he's given a lot of grammar and explanation for. Again, he's given me much more respect for what's gone on in religion.
I like it. I love words. I love new words, neologisms.
No, but words are important because they allow us to talk about these things in a way that we weren't able to talk about before. So
exactly.
it's not.
And I think that's silly. And I think that's where
gives you insights.
And I think that's where he provides a great or could provide a great utility to the religious as well. In being like, for one, I don't think the religious have been very good at being able to communicate across the religious boundaries. And I think that with Vervaeke's work, that might be a resource that we could draw upon in order to do these types of things. Like for one, like he's providing a resource for communication between, say, like the Christian and the secular. But besides that, he could also be providing a way of communication between the Christian and the Muslim, or the Christian and the Jew, or Christian and the Buddhist.
But religions don't speak, people speak. And cognitive science doesn't speak, John Vervaeke speaks.
Yeah, but he's providing the language in which to speak.
Like, for example, I think there are a lot of religious people who really don't think atheists or non-believers have any meaning in their lives. And I hope that a religious person watching this would come to a different conclusion on this, that they could see that, yeah, you know what, maybe those non-believers do actually have meaning in spirituality as well. They just see it a little bit differently than we do. But
is that a dig at me and Craig, Brett?
No. It's not at you guys, because I think you guys do. I think you guys do think that atheists have that, but maybe a dig at the person for the 5 minutes I was listening to today on Craig's channel that seemed to be saying the standard without God.
Glenn Scribner, as you dig at Glenn.
I had to leave. I had to go. I was going to see my brother, so I didn't want to dive in because I would have been late as I'm arguing.
He was like back. Fuming just listening to our conversation.
Fuming, but I was like, no, that's wrong.
He's a lot more overtly evangelical.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking to John after the thing was over. He's a lot more overtly evangelical. I totally understand. I was thinking that as he was talking, that there were atheists who were going to bristle at some of the stuff he was saying.
Yeah, I didn't have time, unfortunately, to dive in, but I'll listen to it at a later time, and I'll write.
And I think that's like a way in which Vervaeke hopefully can provide some sort of utility, is allowing people to be able to, like, because that's the thing, like when somebody's speaking from within their religious worldview, they're using their own terminology, they're using their own way in which they think about these types of things. And so for somebody that's outside of that framework, it can be very hard to even
know what they're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. or to even think that they're talking about anything meaningfully.
Right.
And so, like, if what Vervaeke is doing can provide some sort of basis in which to sort of make sense of, like, what the religious people are doing when they're kookily talking about spiritualism and all that type of stuff, then that would be highly useful.
Tyler, you're floating in space.
It's honestly no more complicated than he's having smart conversations about these subjects. It's really not any more complicated than that. And that's Jordan Peterson's doing kind of the same thing, but there are limitations to how smart Jordan Peterson will get, at least according to Brett. But that's really all that's going on. Is he's looking deeply into three areas that are very interrelated that we haven't really noticed as a culture are all that interrelated until very recently. Neurology, spirituality, and altered states of consciousness, things like that, and philosophy. He's looking very deeply at their interrelationships and basically just having smart insights.
And give him credit for citing his sources. Like, wow, he cites his sources like that.
Right, but his sources, they are not as good as you would think they are.
Like, he speaks in bibliography, right?
Yeah, totally.
Really interesting.
What's not as good as
so far his sources haven't really, I'm gonna look through all of them, but so far his sources haven't gotten me.
You got a few years to go to this.
I mean,
as I thought they would be,
Yeah. A lot of his sources.
A preacher refer to the scriptures.
A lot of his sources are very much based, very recent, within the past. The oldest thing that he might be referring back to is probably 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. I don't know.
I was talking also, he goes back to Plato and Aristotle.
But I don't know if he ever uses that in his bibliography. If we're okay, in Plato's Republic, he refers to this.
Okay,
thing.
I'll give you one example. He would bring up Karen Armstrong a lot. That's why she popped up on my reading list. Karen Armstrong is great. Brett, you'd like her. John, you would like her, and all three of you would like her. And that's why I thought I'd like her, because I would expect someone it's very illuminating for an atheist, to read her. I think that all atheists should read Karen Armstrong, because they'll have some of the same experience they have with John Vervaeke. Opens up your mind to a different way of thinking about this stuff. So I was expecting them all to be cool like Karen Armstrong, and so far that's the only really good one that he's mentioned offhand a lot. He mentions a lot, and I almost always check them out, and that's the only one that's taken so far. So I was surprised at that. I thought there'd be about 10 who I'd be like, these people are even better than John Vervaeke. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'd like to point out something interesting, that maybe it's a bit of an admixture of the meta layer, but the whole process is a very complicated explanation of history and an analysis of the fine structures of the brain and how it all may be functioning. And yet one of the key elements that you may be utilizing is something like meditation, that you're using to kind of return to a sense of your embodied self and a clear mind, right? With fewer of these kind of cognitive complications. What do you think about that? So I'm up in space for a reason. So like the number of words that we have to talk about the parts inside of a watch doesn't actually change the complications in the watch, nor really our certain kind of appreciation when we look into it and marvel at the workings as they spin and gyrate, right? Now, if we have a name for each of the parts, and we know that one is a spring and one is a barrel spring and one is a flywheel, and we know all those names, that's another part of our brain that's very fascinated with that, how we can point to them and say, see what that does? And I think that the smuggling that's occurring may be related to this, that the aesthetic appeal of the structure of the thing that he presents, though it has phenomenally interesting names, doesn't quite intermesh in the same way that others may intermesh in the whole framework, the whole cloth. And that in that way it may fail to replace religion. It may not meet the needs of a religion that is not a religion, because when you look at all of the very complicated pieces laid out on a table, it is not yet a watch.
Is this another way of saying, for example, like where he would say, knowing how wisdom works does not make one wise? Is that sort of what you're saying, that to have this grammar, to know sort of the different aspects of wisdom or religio or spirituality does not make one wise or spiritual or enlightened or so on?
What I was kind of getting was that the terms that he's giving us to use is based within sort of his own metaphysics, and so by our using them, we're sort of like presumptively using his metaphysics as well. Like, I think I brought this up in one of the very early lectures, where the very term psychotechnology is very much based within sort of this social constructivist view, because like we're saying, oh, these terms that we're using are a technology that we've created. This is us that's creating it. This is the thing that we're using here. It's not like some
that's an interesting point.
Objective thing that we're referring to. It's something of ourselves. And like even then, it's still useful to use these terms sometimes. But I don't know. What were you sort of meaning by that, Tyler?
Who knows?
Well, thanks for coming out. No. What is what I said a bit about it, that just knowing the language and grammar is not the same as being wise? Is that sort of what you were getting at?
When I look at a watch and I appreciate it, I do it for a couple of different reasons. One is the interrelatedness of the pieces and how it all functions to produce an outcome. And so that other component is the outcome. I can tell time with it, right? And if it's a really good watch, I can tell a really good time with it, right? Fine discrimination. And I can do extra special things like attune a GPS system to within meters of motion on the ground if I have a really nice clock, right? So there's something to the interrelatedness of the pieces that has to function and produce an outcome. And I'm wondering, in 50 lectures, when you take all of that and assemble it in front of you like a watch. What is it calibrating within you?
Mhm.
What is it
That's a good. I got
motivating
you.
within
Yeah.
you? What is it? What activity is it allowing you to do in the world and understand
All right.
and be,
I
and
see what you're
how is
saying.
it
So
interrelating?
Yeah, I see what you're saying now.
I think part of now, I think to be fair, I don't think that's why he's doing all that. So there's two aspects. There's two aspects.
You think he's just doing it for the money?
No. I think he's making the case. He's convinced. He wants you to be convinced that following, like what it comes down to is what he said at the end, like wise cultivation of enlightenment, situated in a worldview that affords worldview attunement in a cooperative network of communities of practice. That's what he wants you guys to do. The rest of it is to convince you to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think,
Are you
yeah,
convinced?
this whole series is to sort of set the groundwork in order for people to be able to like move forward with whatever he's sort of planning on doing, building a religion that's not a religion, but also just being able to sort of use these same principles and dialogue with each other.
Like he wants you to say,
language.
hey, I get it. I can see why it's a good idea for us to get into this network of communities of practice and, within a worldview that's attuned with science. That's what I think all of it is. We should recognize that there is a meaning crisis and that this is the effect of it with these, what does he call it? Why am I blanking on the terms that he always says, the historical, whatever.
So is Vervaeke offering a triage for you?
Well, he hasn't yet, in that he hasn't really set out, for example, he hasn't given the path forward. I think he's given the reason to go on this path, and he's convinced me it's worth going on. But for example, let's just take somebody who's not I don't think I'm not currently in we have this community, but this isn't the kind of community he's talking about. I'm not currently in a network of communities of practice with a reflective equilibrium dynamic with a wisdom wiki that has both top-down researchers on wisdom and practitioners and bottom-up top-down relationships. So, I don't think he's given, I'm sort of meditating on my own using Sam Harris's app, but I don't think he's provided the way forward yet. He's just provided the reasons to take that way. So I don't have the answer of what should I do now other than continue what I've been doing. I have a lot more appreciation for these things. Even the concept of relevance realization now seems to pop up everywhere, now that I'm keyed into it.
Highly relevant now, right?
Yeah. So there's some technical stuff that I think he again, providing the grammar for thinking about things is useful. Yes, you can think about it without that grammar, but it helps. Again, language is a psychotechnology. Having these terms helps you think about it in a more precise way than you did before, because most people, we don't think about this stuff, on the same level that he has, and I think that's pretty useful.
Also, it's the beginning stages. Some of the things I think that some of John Vervaeke is too it's hard to put my finger on what he's doing that sometimes feels wrong, but too complex and glib and too many thousands of words to explain things that are probably a lot more simple. But he's the first step in a very new exploration of science meets spirituality that he's getting a lot of things that are interesting and worth thinking about, and a lot of things that I think are right. I don't think there's anything programmatic yet, and there's nothing all that clear about his 50 lectures, even meaning crisis. I'm not even sure if he even explained clearly what he means by that. I'm not even sure. Remember when I was going to have you originally on Pleasure of Doubt, I was going to ask you very simple questions about John Vervaeke's lectures, because I don't think they have any real answers. He goes into 1,000-word glib superstructure of 50,000 different words, but I don't ever think he says this is clearly what this is and this is clearly what that is. He goes into John Vervaeke tirade mode. You know what I mean?
The best I can gather is that meaning comes down to having I guess, an answer to the agent arena.
Right. See, but even there, agent arena, you're already using Vervaeke speak. I was going to try to. I realized that it was fruitless to ask you to simplify it for an audience who doesn't know it, because it's almost impossible to do. And that could actually be a criticism of John Vervaeke.
Yeah,
it's impossible. Maybe
you know what?
Maybe it is. I don't know. I'm
just
just offering that.
The analogy of the football player in the tennis stadium, I think, is a good way that, the football player goes into a tennis stadium. Let's just say he's never heard of tennis before. He's an athlete. But suddenly the arena has changed into a tennis stadium. He doesn't know the rules. So he has his set of skills, but he doesn't know what to do with them. He doesn't know the rules of the game. So suddenly he's lost. And so meaning is about finding out who you are, finding out the rules of the game, finding out your relationship to yourself, the world, the other people around you, and being comfortable in that. And that's when we get
okay, yeah,
okay, that's where meaning comes from.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, maybe there is a way to codify it and simplify it and distill the essence of what John Vervaeke has taught over 50 lectures, so that it translates to someone who's never heard it. To simplify it.
And I think laying that out just as you did, I think you did quite well there, Brett.
Yeah, that was good. That was really good.
It almost makes it harder to see how this last lecture, with supposedly the conclusion, or at least leading up to the conclusion, really draws a connection between his work on relevancy realization and consciousness and all that to the meaning crisis itself. Like, I know he talked about both of those things, but it's hard to really see how all of his work on relevancy realization provides the listener with the resolution to the meaning crisis that they might have, where their agent arena relationship is not compatible with each other, or not at least working in tandem with each other.
Well, for example, we talked about Sarferson. This is in the last lecture. We talked about Sarferson being an optimization of perspectival knowing. So it's always in service of my agent arena relationship and how it is being developed, so I can go through transformations needed to become a wise person. And Sarferson is directed to morality, knowing the rules and the capacity of being virtuous, realizing the meaning in life, self-determination theory, which he says needs to be revised, and mastery, terrific capacity for coping and caring with reality, set of skills, psychotechnologies, rules you can take. I mean, these are all coming around to that, just who am I, where am I, what are the rules? And when we don't know where we are, metaphorically, we feel lost, right? I mean, I know right. Parts where I feel very confident of where I am and who I am, and there's other parts of my life where I do feel that loss. So I that resonates with me.
Right. So maybe it's almost like he sold us this IKEA table, and he sold us the parts, and he sold us the tools, but he didn't sell us the blueprint. How are we supposed to put this thing together?
No, wait a minute. Maybe he or he sold us he sold us like parts of the blueprint. He sold us the tools. We didn't give us the parts of the table.
Maybe, yeah.
He duped us.
Well, no, but he's open about it. Like, he's open about
Buddhist.
it.
All he did was turn us into Buddhists, and he didn't even give us like the proper boot.
Well, I think what he wants, like he wants now, from what I gather, he wants us to form communities to figure this stuff out. I mean, that's what I gather. Like I'm still not completely like.
Can we get some kind of e-meter?
Sorry?
The Scientologists have e-meters. Yeah. Can we get something like EKG?
Yeah.
Transcranial magnetic stimulation. Can that be like tier 3? Right?
He seems to think that a wikification of this is what's going to do it. And I'm not entirely convinced. Not that a wikification isn't useful. I think wikis are useful.
Have you participated in wikifying anything?
I haven't, but I've looked into the backgrounds of wikis.
I thought he was meaning that metaphorically. Like, I don't think...
No, he does not mean that metaphorically.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He really, like, when he says that, he means a open source, collectivist type of wiki of wisdom and meaning.
A religion built from the ground up. Okay.
Right. like one thing I'm still not convinced of, like he put all this work into explaining the necessity or at least the importance of narrative, and then he sort of threw narrative away. And I don't think this wikification is a replacement. Like he was saying even in this lecture that the wiki is sort of like takes the place of what did he, let's see, why am I blanking?
Well, it sort of takes the place of like having some sort of core doctrine, I guess, because it's like able to be updated, and it's also, but it still like provides a utility or provides a resource to sort of go to when you need it. He says
the wiki takes on a credo function, and like I get it, like to some extent, yeah, you can have a wiki that provides you with a great reference document, but it's not going to take the place of myth. It's not going to take the place of narrative. Like I thought he was going to at some point say we need to create new narratives. I'm totally on board with that, but I don't know how. I think he was a little too blasé about.
Yeah, let's perform it.
Jettisoning.
Go start a wiki right now on points of wisdom or ways of being, and open it up to the public, and let's see what sifts to the top.
Yeah, no, it'd be interesting. Well, I was actually just thinking about that. I was thinking it'll probably cost money. I don't have it right now, so.
Well, I don't even know how normal Wikipedia actually works, because like I don't know how, but somehow people work together and make some sort of like resource of information.
Take some time if you want to be amazed, and go look at the talk pages for any controversial wiki page, and you will like. First of all, I don't know how anybody communicates in that format. We need to do better. Like it's not user friendly, but it's arguments, and behind the scenes there's so much fighting on these wiki pages.
Oh, really?
Like, yeah. Tyler, it sounds like you have some knowledge of
no
that.
More. I dropped out of that game.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I've never done it, but I've looked at. I had spent some time once trying to track a wiki like a talk pages argument, and oh my god, I don't know how these people do it, and some of these people are very dedicated.
It's possible though that he's right, not necessarily a wiki, but that idea of like open source, where you don't need a core dogma or a core doctrine, because it's constantly being updated, and you're constantly being fed new information, and the new information's so you're able to refer back to something constantly that's always on the move and spontaneous and, flexible. And so he may be right about that. It wouldn't necessarily be a wiki, but there may be something coming, not Twitter, but something, the new Twitter, the 5 years from now, Twitter, that does some sort of service like that, where you're able to process the information somehow codify the information quickly so that you can get accurate. I don't know. I think you all know what I mean. I
agree
come
entirely.
On. Let's be concrete, serious. Come on. What does he mean?
No, he's talking about an evolving that it's evolving. That as we learn like more, the Bible doesn't, at least is not supposed to evolve in the same
exactly
way.
What he just said, like a new social media tool where it has accurate, somehow it can tell you if something's accurate immediately, so you're only getting accurate information, and it's constantly updating, and it's constantly processing, like a Wikipedia, processing the new information that's out there, somehow correlating it really quickly. And I think that's actually doable. I think that will happen soon.
I'm sorry, what is it correlating? These are questions that you're
here's how he describes it. He describes it as a reflective equilibrium that's dynamic, with the wisdom wiki that is both top-down, researchers on wisdom, and practitioners. So there's both bottom-up and a top-down relationship that are going back and forth. So the wisdom wiki takes on a credo function, but is in service of religio, created by the communities of practice.
Yeah, it's kind of what I just said. It's
it's
doable. It could happen, actually. It kind of could, not necessarily as a wiki, because we're only thinking of like Wikipedia, but that idea could actually happen where there's some gatekeepers, and so there's truth being processed. So it's not just random, but then there's also spontaneous input organically from the community, so that they're in relationship with each other. I could actually see that happening, believe it or not. to a certain degree.
I can see
Like
that
a
being
smart
part
Twitter.
of it.
Like
It
an
happens all the
intelligent
time.
But the other part is like he doesn't want people just going off on their own and just doing it on their own and figuring stuff up in a autodidactic manner. So these communities don't exist yet unless we're just going to co-opt the Buddhists.
So then let me snatch back to the first question then. How do you trust the person at the top?
Because there's some sort of, it's the same way you trust data. It's a correlated you don't necessarily trust the person at the top. You trust the information gathering process. I mean, we know when there's accurate information out there, even when we know that the media is wrong, we know how we can get the right story if we cross-reference it with five different other sources and things like that. So
I'll ask you again. So you trust Vervaeke's depiction of cognitive science then? Or did you go and, I mean, do you understand his depiction of how the brain functions and all of that? Or you just trust it because he has a...
Well, remember, he says this is ongoing work. So he's presenting a snapshot of the picture of cognitive science as it exists today. He's in each of the sections where he talks about cognitive science, he's talked about where the research is going.
I'm trying to point out a top-down, bottom-up relationship and information that exists in the present moment, right? Like in the present circumstance where we're discussing what you're assuming.
But he's not offering us anything that's like, if he were offering something weird or controversial or that isn't, to the best of my knowledge, kind of standard intelligent opinions on subjects. Like when he talks about Heidegger, it matches everything I've ever heard about Heidegger from any other source. So it's not like it's radical or weird or like, so of course I trust it, but I trust it based on some experience and some knowledge that I'm bringing to the table. You know what I'm saying?
What about the rest of it? What about all of it?
There's a lot of it that I trust. I mean, I'm sure there's inaccuracies in what he's presenting, but there's a lot, like when he talked about the flow state, I've learned that from other sources, pretty accurate as far as I was concerned. When he was talking about altered states of consciousness and how they affect people and shamanism, matched everything I've ever read on any other time on the topic. So it's not like he was offering anything really weird that I was like, oh,
I've
wait,
seen him
what's
have
that?
conversations with other academics, and you would think that at least some people, if he was completely off the mark.
Well, you just said an interesting word.
Academics. Well, because these are the people who study this stuff, right?
Oh, okay.
Well, it's not that other people can't, but these are the people who focus their lives on studying.
They have the answers, right?
Well, they should have some expertise, and
they've read this stuff to an extent that's much higher than your.
Yeah, they know more than you. They have the answers, right?
I guess, but I don't know if I think about it that way. They have the information, maybe. Yeah. No, it depends what you mean by they have the answers.
I'm not actually sure what
well, there seems to be some resistance to you guys answering directly. It's kind of interesting. I was trying to get to a further point, but I'm trying to understand how it is that we trust information and how we develop top-down and bottom-up hierarchies in general.
Okay.
How it is
I'll tell you, when somebody cites their sources, and sets out their, when somebody sets out,
I cite the Bible. I can cite the Bible.
No, hold on. When somebody sets out their arguments in detail and cites their sources, and plus being in an environment where if they were completely wrong,
they'd be called out
on these things. They'd be called out, right? Just because they're in an environment where people would call them out. Especially university professors are in an environment where people. I mean, look at Jordan Peterson. People call him out all the time in the things where he's wrong, right? Because it's an environment where there's the people he's talking to. His primary audience are people who also spend all their time reading this stuff too.
So you trust the academic layer to generally produce truthful statements.
No, but where they're in dispute, there are cross references. Most of the stuff that, in particular, John Vervaeke, most of what he has presented in his videos is relatively non-controversial. So there's no reason to. Never did he say anything that I was like, I really doubt that, based on my own body of knowledge. If he did, I'd go look, but he didn't. I went to look because I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I want to hear what Karen Armstrong has to say because I like what he got from her. I was checking his sources not to see that he was accurate, because most of his information struck me as really accurate. If I had reason to doubt it, I would cross-reference and look, but most of it was fairly within the realm of common knowledge.
And you would confirm that how? You would go somewhere else to some other source?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been reading my whole life. I mean,
Where
if he
would you
said,
go? What kind of source would you go to find out?
well, it depends on what we were talking about. Like if you're talking about altered states of consciousness, I've read other books on the subject, and I've read books on shamanism, and I've, gone to Wikipedia and read about shamanism, actually, so
So you
as far as
trust
I know,
those books too?
as far as I know, I'm getting most of my information from fairly trustworthy sources, and I don't see any reason to doubt their integrity. If you gave me a good reason to doubt their integrity, then I would start looking.
So when you say trustworthy, do you mean something like you read it and it confirms your own experience? It comports with your experience?
No, it comports with what I understand to be the general body of knowledge.
I think what he's
on
saying
the
is
subject.
that in the areas, sort of similar to what I said, that in the areas where I do have some knowledge, what he said was in tune with what I knew about that. So that
Right.
gives me more confidence than the areas where I don't know about it. He's likely to be on board as
I've
well.
read
the
about
knowledge
Plato.
seems consistent.
Right.
Yeah.
I've read about Plato. I've read about Heidegger. I brought enough of my own knowledge of Plato, Heidegger, standard academic college level education on some of these subjects.
Mhm.
And he didn't say anything that I was like, okay, that's just wrong. Okay, and most of his knowledge was pretty in depth. And to the best of my understanding, now I'm not an expert, but to the best of my understanding, really accurate or relatively accurate, so I can trust it.
So
Struck
if
me as a trustworthy source of knowledge.
If you
He
were in
does.
charge of the wiki,
I'd give him a decent seat at the table in terms of being able to edit some of what was being presented. He strikes me as a trustworthy source. He really does. And he cites a lot of his information, and it's readily available to go digging into. Now, I've gone digging into it, but never to see if he was right, because most of the information he presents strikes me as well within the boundaries of 89% accurate enough for my purposes that I'm with him. I think does that answer mostly what you're getting at, I think, or no?
well, to what degree are you willing to extend him that authority? That's what I'd be.
I would say 89%. I would say I'd give him a high. I'd say he's
no. I mean, in a future situation. So I'm trying to build up his idea and extrapolate in the future and building up these communities of relation.
It depends on how radical what he presents in the future is. If it's information about subjects that he seems to know a lot about, I give him a lot of authority. I take his information
I'll give
about
one, like polyamory, for instance. What do you think about polyamory?
I don't even really know what it is. What is it? It's like the people marry two women or something. I'm not really sure what they mean by it. No, I would not
They
take
have
him
a
as
non-monogamous relationship.
I would not take him as a
both
source
parties
on ethics or values of life choices at all. That's a very different thing. It's entirely subjective. I would take him as a source on standard academia, knowledge of neuroscience, knowledge of philosophy. He has more authority on the subject of Heidegger, Plato, altered states of consciousness, neuroscience. He knows more about those than I do, and his knowledge strikes me as comprehensive and accurate. So I give him a lot of authority in those areas. Areas of life decisions, things like that, I'd give him almost none.
Where does polyamory come into this? I
Yeah,
don't think you've mentioned it.
Well, so I don't think you've really looked into cults very much. And you would know right away what I'm talking about. So
he's cultivating chicks to who think he's like,
when
that what he's
people
doing?
come together, there are fundamental relationships that are always expressed, and the sexual one is almost always predominantly central theme. There's a reason why religions deal with this pattern over and over and
If
over
he
again.
starts
So many
sneaking
fascinating
in,
ways.
like he hasn't mentioned, I think, sex
Yeah,
much
I'm
at
not-
all.
Well, I
He
know.
starts
I
sneaking
know.
that in and starts saying,
If he starts
"Oh, and
saying
by the
weird
way,
stuff,
the
I'm
religion
out,
of no
man.
religion, we must have daily orgies."
You
Well,
guys gotta undress in order to
Well,
fully
okay. So
experience.
I would urge you to.
Dude,
I would
I
urge
ain't
you to
going
always
there.
look at the gaps. Always look at the things that remain unsaid, because it's often far louder than the things that are being spoken and far more important.
Okay, but I
So-
hear you, but there's a danger in that because Like,
I'm being tangential. It's not
we...
an important point. We can use something else if you want.
But that what you said is a big point. If we're this is where like communication often breaks down, where people often spend much more time arguing about what has not been said than what has been said. Isn't it more productive to focus on what has been said?
Okay, so here, let me do this then. He's drawing a shape called the Wisdom Wiki. Okay.
Right.
And I'm talking about a gigantic freaking hole in the Wisdom Wiki that has to be filled with an answer. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. And it hasn't been touched at all.
Which is what? Sex?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So where are you going with this? I don't fully get what you mean.
Oh, so we're going out into the future, right? So
right.
How does one handle this with a Wisdom Wiki?
Handle what exactly?
It would probably be some sort of like scientific study on the psychological effects of monogamy or polyamory between people. Yeah, that's how I would imagine that sort of subject being tackled.
I think so
Wiki.
I think so too.
Okay.
But yeah,
basically there's the radical statement that you can do literally everything that religions have classically done without any appeal to some type of metaphysical reality outside of naturalism, right?
You think they can pull it off?
So that's a rather radical statement. And when people have tried these things before, right, we run into a lot of
they all
problems.
Become sex cults? Is that
that's a very common thing that happens, right? Well, and you don't need a naturalistic attempt, obviously, but anytime you get a alternative meaning making mechanism than things that have been long time tested, these potentials for things to go really into weird
but
territory.
isn't he bowing to things that have been long time tested enough? Like, he talks about Plato. He cites Plato as an authority on some of what he teaches, right? And he does cite, I mean, he's got authorities on what he is presenting. Doesn't he have some?
Yeah, but that's a ridiculous argument. Literally everyone has done that. It doesn't matter what you're using as your source material.
The way that I see him,
Plato's cult either, by the way.
The way that I see his religion, that's not a religion, sort of moving forward, is not necessarily starting its own thing, but more so integrating itself as being a sect, I guess, of the Buddhist practices with their little workshop of meditations and things like that, so that it's still within the system, I guess, of Buddhism. Since isn't he actually like a Buddhist teacher of some sort, or like he's able to run sessions, something
at
like
least
that.
From their psychotechnologies, but he brings in agape too, which is more Christian. Like he borrows concepts from various religions.
So the way I at least see him sort of moving forward is by starting with the system of the Buddhist sort of workshops, but
I'm
integrating his
John
information
Vervaeke in this big sex orgy now. Thanks, thanks for that.
I know, man.
What did you just say?
If he started saying, in order to realize this religio, you guys got to totally undress, I'd be the first person to be like, wait just a second. I'm interested.
Just said he was picturing something.
Oh, wow. No. When I picture it, I don't picture it in pictures. I picture it in concept still. So I use the word picturing, but I don't. It was more feeling it. Yeah, I don't see it. I don't see the image.
Wow.
He's feeling it. Yeah, it's weird. He's got inside his head for sure.
Well, I thought we maybe had a breakthrough there.
No, unfortunately, no. I've had a couple of flashes of very clear images in my head while awake, but unfortunately, I haven't been able to get myself into that framework.
If Vervaeke and a harem of virgins doesn't do it, then no vision will.
No, but you know what is a digression. What's frustrating is because I've had those two experiences of having very clear images in my head, I know it's possible for me to have visions in my head, which makes it more frustrating because there's something that's just not connecting to make it happen. But anyway, that's
anyways, I gotta go, guys. So
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks, Greg, for
yeah, it's
joining
cool.
us.
Be careful of Vervaeke. I've been just, take what he says with a grain of salt. And if he ever asks you to like meet him after the lecture, don't. You know what I'm saying? Just don't.
Bring somebody
Don't do
else
it.
with you.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys.
Yeah,
I'll talk to you
Thanks,
later.
Greg. Talk to you.
Bye.
It's funny. So we're hoping to have a conversation with him. Professor, can you tell us about the allegations that you're running a sex cult? Where did these allegations come from? Well, Tyler here.
Tyler started it. Yeah.
I'm always curious about the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You look at the past and you can't help but be curious of the future. So I think lofty aims and lofty goals are worthwhile, but you do have to contend with these serious issues. You do have to contend with like actually building it out. I'm somewhat involved in the process of building out a kind of knowledge wiki right now and watching the nitty gritty of it, watching experts develop their linguistic structures, which then do battle with each other. I don't know how that gets solved exactly. I haven't seen any reveal behind the curtain yet that demonstrates that there is a principle embedded in the 4E cognitive science landscape that's going to bring this watch together. So that's all.
My issue is that it seems like you still need some sort of structure beyond a wiki to get something really off the ground. And I don't know what the structure would look like. But without a structure, I mean, what you have is just small groups of individuals and, grouping up and just doing their own stuff, which doesn't seem
a
lasting.
worthy contender against all the other religions. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
like I said, does it move you? How does it inspire you?
Well, I would be up for getting involved in the creation of something new. But I would raise a, what's that?
Would you raise a barn?
Would I raise a barn?
Like the
That's
Amish.
an expression I don't know.
Like the Amish. Would you gather with your fellow Vervaekeites and raise a barn?
Maybe. I mean, if there was a community of the religion of no religion, I might want to get to know people. And what was that?
Yeah, it's hammering. Sorry, I'm in space. You probably can't.
You can't hammer in space, Tyler. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
But he's convinced me there's something that's worth looking into here, and I mean he's convinced me more than that, like that there's a lot more to spirituality and what's it called?
There's something worth
ritual and just that these religions have been doing more than I thought they were doing, and so on. Even going back to I know a little bit about shamanism and all that, but he's done all that, and I think, but he hasn't given the way forward, and I don't know. I don't think he's meant to quite, and maybe he doesn't know the way forward. I mean, he had that one discussion on beginnings to structure out the religion. It's not a religion, but I have to listen to it again. It didn't seem as
only one way, Pod.
What's that?
There's only one way.
What's the way?
Straight is the gate. And narrow the way.
Are you saying Christ? Is that
salvation? I don't know. What is Christ?
Well, I mean, there's been plenty of other religions that have started that aren't explicitly based on Christ.
Well, yeah, but we'd have to go into what the symbol of Christ is, and
I guess, but I mean, I don't know. There's like I think
that's straying into Peterson territory, right?
Yeah. Like I would say so far the most recent successful religion has been the Scientology. And even then, like you have to sort of strain your definition of successful there. But I do think it provides meaning for people. I do think it allows them to resolve any psychological states of anxiety, things like that. So
and they're pro-slavery.
Well, yeah. There's a lot of back dirty dealings within the Church
So
of Scientology.
by what metric then are you determining wisdom or meaning making in this organization?
I guess
Tom Cruise, John Travolta,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure, I'll go with that.
pinnacles of their industry, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely Tom Cruise for sure. I don't know about John
Real
Travolta
stand-up
so much
guy.
anymore.
Hallelujah. It's raining.
Anyway, so it like I don't suspect that Vervaeke is trying to emulate Scientology at all. But I think at least the fact that Scientology exists in some manner gives credence to the possibility that a new religion could come forth that has some sort of lasting power.
Well, they do all that. Well,
sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was gonna say I think part of it has to address some of the more communal functions that religions have. If you want to have a community, then your religion is not a religion. It has to provide that sense of community, and just sort of saying wiki it doesn't provide a sense of community. I mean, sure, you'll get a community of dedicated, zealous, authors, and those guys will dedicate countless hours to trying to make these wikis a good thing, but that's not going to
spend 50 hours of watching Vervaeke's lectures and then write up this whole document with all the notes.
Crazy people like that. Crazy.
Psychopaths. What are they thinking?
No, but it is interesting too, looking at that communal aspect, because there's interesting things that have happened within the church, which is, generally speaking, the ones that have actually tried to adapt themselves to kind of more recent cultural trends seem to regularly experience a falling out of the community, right? It actually loses meaning in its adaptation to the world as it's going through its little dramas and stories. So I don't know. There again, it's just reverberating in my head. There's something, right? And he brings it up: cognitive styles, right? He uses the word cognitive styles when he means metaphysics, but it's different layers. A cognitive style is embodied metaphysics.
Yeah,
and then, metaphysics as we normally think of it would be the propositional aspect, right? The propositional description of your cognitive style. So there's something to be said about how these cognitive styles add up into communal spaces that are able to create a cyclical motion of energy, right? It's something that's able to sustain itself.
Right, where typically religions would have some sort of system of metaphysics that are based within the propositional. That way there's some sort of shared understanding going on between these people. But if he's sort of...
in a shared cognitive style, that's what they're doing. That's what it's trying to do, right? So you also can run into the problem where you overweight the propositional, and then the people aren't embodying the metaphysics, and you can have a falling out.
Definitely.
Right. So, but yeah.
Yeah. And so if he's sidestepping metaphysics entirely and only working on how these things are acted out, or using metaphysics as just a way in which to get into a certain mindset, like he talked about the scaling out and scaling in, and that's sort of like taking on a new metaphysical understanding of reality where you don't exist, or scaling in where you're ultimately connected to the groundwork of all being, or something like that, where you're kind of putting on these lenses of metaphysics in order to resolve or work through whatever process here, or just
what's the universe mean if I'm an illusion, and then what's it mean if I'm the only confirmable thing in existence? Right, those are kind of the two metaphysical styles that you're flitting between there. What's it mean if I don't actually exist and I'm just imagining myself as existing, compared to
but it seems like he's still if he's trying to build a wiki of wisdom, that seems like there would have to be some sort of shared propositional aspect that's still happening. And I would think that that would have to have some sort of underlying metaphysics. And I guess the underlying metaphysics would just be naturalism in some sense. But I guess naturalism is just sort of left.
It's not enough, I don't think, because you also need a metaphysic that's telling you why the wisdom is. Why are you doing it in the first place? Why are you pursuing it within a naturalistic
Well, he has
frame?
50 lectures to tell you exactly that.
Well, that's what I mean, though, when I blame him of smuggling metaphysics that are not found within natural.
Well, but maybe he doesn't want it to just be metaphysics as the reason. He wants it to be science and philosophy is the reason why you should do it.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of the thing. Like he's sort of rejecting the idea that we require the sacred connected to like our ontological understanding of reality as reality actually is, in order to have sacredness. Like you can still have sacredness even if it's not connected to some sort of specific real ontological thing, which is, I don't know. I'd probably have to rewatch that lecture just to see if he argues successfully for that. But it's,
again, I get that sense, right? We can have magic tricks and just call them miracles.
Yeah,
I don't think it's sustainable. That's my problem there.
Well, he hasn't given enough.
I could be wrong. It's a worthwhile experiment. So
he hasn't given enough of the scaffolding of this religion that's not a religion to even come to a conclusion as to whether it's sustainable or not. What he's done is he's made the case for why we should have it, but the structure of it is a big question mark at this stage. And to be fair, he hasn't pretended to have that structure. It's interesting that this is very much a work in progress. Even when he was talking about, like, he was critiquing his own theory of wisdom, saying, hey, we haven't brought in the participatory yet. We haven't brought in sacredness and meaning in life yet. We still need to do this. We still need to, this is very much work in progress. This is why I thought it was like, I mean, it's ironic, but at some points I had the feeling of what a disciple of, say, Jesus would feel like before it was fully formed, just hearing the thought process of the structure forming. That's where we're at. We're not at the answer. The full way has not been provided. The grounding of the way has been provided, but
so do you wait for it to be presented in the wiki format or for it to be peer reviewed by his scientific peers or his cognitive science peers before you?
No, I mean, one thing I started doing is like internalizing the sage. I just earlier today I was trying to have a little dialogue in my head of what I should do, and then I didn't like the answer because I had it would mean I have to do it, and I got the Jordan Peterson sense of, when you ask, you may not like what you have to answer. There's a lot of pressure and anxiety there, but I got it. I got the answer. Like, I asked the question and had the answer. I'm trying to meditate every day. I'm not doing a good job of it, but it's my goal. I'd like to try to dabble in. I just don't know how or how to get it, or I need people around me. Like, I'd like to try to dabble with some psychedelics at some point, but so I think there are things to start doing. Of course, was doing some of this before and trying to and I think I actually think I started my act of open-mindedness before I even heard of him. I mean, I think what I've been trying to do with a lot of my method of productive discussion, I think, is very in sync with his act of open-mindedness, of just how to promote actual open-mindedness. So I think I'm in line with what he's suggesting and willing to stick around for the ride.
Oh yeah, same.
What about you, Tyler? Like you have this. I know we want to. John wants to. I think you were about to say we should wrap up, but I'm just like, you have this unstated criticism. But what do you feel about all of this?
I am deeply appreciative of the physical work that he's doing to speak the words, to share what he knows. I am, for many reasons, highly curious as to what the telos of the projects are and how it manifests further down the road, because I'm not just following along per episode, let's say, right? So I'm looking for some glint, right? There's got to be shine on the fruit. And I've looked at a lot of fruit in the world, and I don't see anything super delicious yet, right? If I can be metaphorical. So I'm like, I think he's a very good presenter of scientific ideas, but in terms of what it may mean to develop a structure that's strong enough to unite disparate, as Nick pointed out earlier, personality and psychic frameworks, I don't know. Not yet.
Yeah, fair enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree with probably quite a bit of that. That it's hard to, like, looking back, it's hard to pinpoint what exactly his most prominent position, like what it, like, definitely he's providing us with a strong, like, grammatical foundation in order to speak about these types of things, and for that, like, my hat's off to him, since he's provided a lot of, like, very useful terms that I hadn't ever had to think about or consider before, but now I use them fairly regularly. Quite a few of them also. So that's at least one area in which he's providing a resource, but it's hard to exactly see what the, I guess, broader impact, I guess.
Well, let me ask this. Let me ask this. We've got what, 3 episodes left, right? So we're really getting to the end part here.
Yeah.
Once we get to the end part, has he convinced you guys enough that, say, we as our own little community should start saying, okay, well, how can we cultivate active open-mindedness, insightful processing through mindfulness, internalizing the sage, like doing our own grouping together of cultivating psychotechnologies, working on them together, supporting each other, and in the line of what he's saying, and sort of try to put some of this into practice, maybe like being part of figuring out what this religion that's not a religion might look like from both the secular and, like we're a group of theists and non-theists, together, like
this, something like this.
Yeah, like would we want to continue doing this in an organized way, where we say, okay, we're gonna support each other and figuring out what psychotechnologies we can do, at least part, whether it's meditating or figuring out other stuff. Like a lot of it is cultivating. He used that word cultivating in his model theory of wisdom, which means like active open-mindedness. A lot of this is doing these psychotechnologies on purpose, putting them into practice, being part of our normal daily lives. And I think you recognize it's hard to do just on your own. It's a lot easier to do in a community with other people who are,
absolutely. And I think that's where the distinguishing factor between him and probably Peterson, or one of the distinguishing factors, is the fact that he's very much recognizing how much a sense of community is necessary to a person's agent arena relationship, or finding meaning within life. I think that's something that he gets, that I think Peterson underrepresents in his work. The other thing I think that Vervaeke actually dwells on the philosophy and actually contends with it, whereas Peterson, I think, sort of doesn't really bother to go through with that type of that. Peterson's much more of a psychologist and interested in that area, whereas Vervaeke's probably somewhat more of a philosopher, or a philosopher of religion.
Philosopher king.
Yeah, that's what great old philosopher King John Vervaeke. Yeah.
But that's something I think once this is over, we should talk about, to see, are we interested? I mean, I'd be interested, but but what would we want to do? How would it look like? What could we do? it's a little harder. Like, you know, we're across the world, but it might be interesting to see what we can put together and then join our cult. I mean, our group.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining me. Thanks again to Craig for joining us, and I'll have all the links to everybody down below. And yeah, if you want to get in on the action for some of these last conversations that we're going to be having, just reach out to us on the Discord or on Twitter, and we'll probably be able to slot you in. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'm tired. I'm like so tired right now. But yeah, good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks, everyone. That was great.